Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 episode number 77 based on novel. So let's start. Han Ruoruo smiled and whispered, "It's up to the two of you now. Do warn everyone in time if you discover anything, alright? Hurry and rest, senior sister," Hu Yuhao answered politely, while Wang Chua didn't respond at all. The two of them stood shoulder to shoulder, and Wang Chua was still as cold as she had always been. However, she actually removed her veil at this moment for some reason. The forest night wasn't an absolute darkness where one couldn't see anything at all. Moonlight cascaded through the canopy and showered onto the forest through the shadows of the trees, and there were some tiny insects around that gave off light as well. The light was weak, but they could still see. Hu Yuhao looked at her profile when he turned towards Wang Chua. It was just so familiar and beautiful. If he hadn't known better, he wouldn't have been able to tell whether the person beside him was Wang Chua or Wang Donga. "She's so pretty," Hu Yuhao exclaimed in admiration inside, before he hurriedly turned back around and activated his spiritual detection before he shared it with her. Wang Chua glanced in his direction and muttered, "Your soul skill is good." She had a charming voice, but it still sounded a little cold and forced no matter how one heard it. Hu Yuhao retrieved some dry rations and asked, "Do you want some?" The rations he took out were meat sandwiches he had prepared earlier. Baked bread was food that didn't spoil easily, and there was some meat packed inside. It was a little dry, but it still tasted alright. Hu Yuhao was just being courteous and polite, but he didn't think that Wang Chua would ask, "Did you make that yourself?" Hu Yuhao nodded and replied, "Donga is a little picky with her food. I made some braised meat before this, and the baked bread was taken from the canteen. It tastes alright." Wang Chua glanced at him and said, "You're really good to her." Hu Yuhao smiled and gestured towards her with the meat sandwich in his hands. Wang Chua took 2 pieces from him. Hu Yuhao realized to his surprise that her hands were covered with a faint golden aura. That layer was dark golden in color, and it was surprisingly inconspicuous in the darkness of the night. She passed the sandwiches back in the next moment. "Hand me another 2, Wang Chua said plainly. Hu Yuhao took the 2 sandwiches back suspiciously, but he had a revelation once he held them in his hands. The 2 sandwiches were now warm, and they carried delicate wafts of cooking meat. Her soul power can even be used for grilling? Hu Yuhao hurriedly passed her another 2 sandwiches, while he took a bite from the one already in his hands. The sandwich tasted different when it was warm. The braised meat became a lot more tender, while the tendons in the meat were half melted. The fresh and salty juice that diffused into the bread had been warmed up, and the sandwich truly tasted a lot better than it did when it was cold. Wang Chua did the same thing and heated up her own sandwich before she started nibbling away. "I didn't expect you to have an ability like this. We don't have to eat cold rations anymore," Hu Yuhao said with a smile on his face. Wang Chua seemed to have recovered her coldness as she said, "Just this once. Consider this a gesture of appreciation for your grilled fish and soup in the afternoon." Hu Yuhao wasn't upset at all. He chuckled and said, "Do you really have to reject everyone and close yourself off like that? We're teammates now." Wang Chua snapped her head around and stared into his eyes as she asked, "Do you guys really treat me like your teammates? Then why do I feel a sense of hostility from her?" Hu Yuhao was rendered speechless by her question. The truth was that he could also feel the hostility that Wang Donga harbored against Wang Chua. He forced a laugh and said, "The truth is that I don't understand it, either. The two of you look too similar, and Donga insists that she doesn't have a twin sister. Perhaps that's why she's suspicious of you. I trust that time will serve to prove everything." There was a look of profoundness in his eyes when he uttered this last sentence. Wang Chua turned back around and continued eating the sandwich in her hands. She said coldly, "I have never had to prove anything to anyone." Hu Yuhao had already finished the food in his hands by now. He retrieved his water bag and took a few gulps as he smiled and said, "That's not a good attitude. First, we live in the same world, and you can't possibly reject and forsake everything in the world. You can't decide how people look at you. Since that's the case, why don't you try to fit in? Will being so reticent and aloof bring you happiness? Fit in? Do you really think I can fit in? Ever since I left home, everyone outside has been attracted by my looks. Do you know how many people come forward to flirt with me in a single day? I've even met some people who would do anything to get to me. I do want to fit in, but the process of fitting in will have to rely on my fists. That is the reason I wear the veil, and it has alleviated much of my troubles." Hu Yuhao said exasperatedly, "That's because you're too good-looking. Perhaps this is the negative effect of being so blessed with beauty by the heavens. However, I can guarantee that you won't run into such problems within Shrek Academy." Wang Chua muttered disdainfully, "You can only speak for yourself." She suddenly tossed the baked bread in her hands as she said, "It's disgusting. I'm not eating that anymore." Hu Yuhao was momentarily stunned, before his eyes suddenly became ice cold in the next moment. Wang Chua felt a slight chill, and turned around subconsciously to look at him. She met Hu Yuhao's eyes, and his eyes flickered with chilly light as she felt a tidal wave of animosity. However, this hostility didn't continue, and the coldness receded. Hua Yuhao walked over to where she threw the baked bread as he bent down and picked it up. Do you want to fight? Wang Chua raised her chin and stared at Hua Yuhao provocatively. Hua Yuhao shot a cold look at her. I would have if we were elsewhere. Have your family never taught you to treasure your food? Do you know that a small piece of baked bread like this can save a life? Wang Chua twitched her lips contemptuously. Hua Yuhao continued, have you ever felt hunger? Wang Chua answered coldly, powerful people will never feel hungry. Hua Yuhao laughed scornfully and said, powerful people? Have you been a powerful individual since the moment you were born? The only powerful people were your parents back then. You've never tasted hunger, so you naturally have no idea how precious food is. The truth was that he didn't laugh because he despised Wang Chua, he just couldn't control himself. He was infuriated when Wang Chua tossed the baked bread onto the ground, as he hated people that didn't respect and appreciate food the most. Furthermore, it was something he had made himself, so she was throwing away his hard work. However, when he picked up the baked bread from the ground, he couldn't help but laugh. Only one bite was taken, but the teeth marks were still there, while all the braised meat was gone. Not even a single bit was left. This girl is really picky with her food. She was just calling the baked bread disgusting. Wang Chua puffed up her firm chest that was more developed than Wang Dong's and said, how do you know I wasn't a powerful being when I was born? It's just a wretched piece of baked bread. Hua Yuhao turned his head around. He didn't want to see the coldness and disdain on her face as he gazed into the darkness and said, yes, it's just a piece of baked bread. However, a piece of baked bread like this means the opportunity to continue surviving to me. He held onto the baked bread that was just thrown onto the ground as he spoke, and he actually bit down on the bread that Wang Chua had just eaten from and began to chew. Wang Chua was still upset, and she was still wearing that look of contempt, but she was dazed when she saw his actions. His eating the baked bread that I've just eaten from. That was the only thought running through her head. And Hua Yuhao. Hua Yuhao's mind was only filled with precious memories. I was only 5 years old back then, and I was still a skinny little kid. My mother and I had to live under someone else's roof, and my mother would feed me every day with her meager salary. My mother still had to wash clothes outside even in the bitter chill of winter, and her hands were covered by wounds and scars. My mother loved me so much. She always told me that I was the only thing that mattered in her life. I still remember that day. The sky had turned dark, and my mother came running in elatedly from outside. It was hard to see her smile through all the excruciating toil of her daily life, but she was just so happy that day. Do you know why? He turned back around and stared into Wang Chua's eyes. At this moment, tears had already welled up in his eyes. He took another bite from the piece of baked bread. He munched and chewed vigorously, and his tears trickled down his cheeks uncontrollably. Why? The cold expression on Wang Chua's face had vanished. She was at a loss. Hua Yuhao continued chewing on the baked bread as he said with a quivering voice, the reason was because my mother was working in the kitchen that day, and the chef in the kitchen had given her a piece of baked bread that was fresh from the wok after she had finished. It was still hot and fragrant, and my mother thought about me. I wouldn't have to eat that cornbread anymore, and I could finally have some bread made from white flour. That was the reason she was so happy and excited. She didn't want the baked bread to go cold, so she stuffed and hugged the steaming bread in her chest. When she took out the baked bread and handed it to me, her chest had turned red from all that heat. I was still young. I still didn't know anything back then. All I knew was to nibble on that warm baked bread. At this point, Hua Yuhao was sobbing and sniffling. He normally wouldn't reveal his emotions so easily in front of outsiders. However, he began to reminisce about his childhood when Wang Chua heated up the baked bread for him. His mind was filled with images of his mother's satisfied smile, but his heart was filled with suffocating pain. Mom, if only you were still alive. I have the ability to take care of you now, and I have the ability to protect you now. Everyone else was still meditating. Hua Yuhao was squatting down as he forcibly suppressed his sobbing sounds in the quiet night as he released the dejection and grief in his heart. Wang Chua was still standing beside him, but she was completely rooted to the ground at this moment. She had never expected a single piece of baked bread could have a story like that. Hua Yuhao was choking a little on the baked bread because of his tears, and his sobbing instantly stopped and became some unnatural sounds. Wang Chua recovered and hurriedly squatted down beside him as she patted his back gently to help him get his breath back. It took some effort, but this mouthful finally went down. Hua Yuhao wiped the tears from his face as he lowered his head and said, "Thank you." Wang Chua reached out and snatched the remaining half from his hands. Hua Yuhao snapped back around at her with a look of astonishment and a little bit of anger, but he then realized that the girl was stuffing the entire piece of baked bread into her mouth as if she wanted to swallow it whole. Her tender and pretty cheeks instantly puffed out as she struggled to chew. Their gazes met once more, and Hua Yuhao laughed through his tears and sniffling as he watched her swallowing furiously. He handed her the water bag in his hands. It wasn't easy, but Wang Chua finally swallowed the baked bread in her mouth with the help of some water. Wang Chua took a deep breath, and she couldn't help but whisper, "It tastes terrible." Hu Yuhao chortled and said, "It's not so bad. It's not terrible to the point where it's inedible, at least." Wang Chua snapped, "I'm talking about your saliva." Hu Yuhao was stunned momentarily. Right. They had both taken turns to bite into this baked bread, and it could be said that they were swallowing each other's saliva. There was a little bit of awkwardness amongst all this, and he subconsciously turned to look at Wang Donga, who was still meditating, a feeling of guilt surging up from the bottom of his heart. Wang Chua grunted contemptuously and said, "Men who are afraid of women are good for nothing. You're a grown man now, and you're still sobbing and crying like that. That's even worse." She handed the water bag back to Hu Yuhao and stood up. Hu Yuhao didn't get angry at all as he put the water bag away. He didn't follow Wang Chua, but remained where he was. He made a mental note that had to maintain his distance from Wang Chua, and he couldn't let Wang Donga misunderstand. However, he swiftly raised his head at this moment. His eyes were still filled with tears, but they suddenly froze as he stared in one particular direction. His spiritual detection was initially working in an area around him, but he instantly switched to a particular direction in front of him. Wang Chua was also part of his spiritual detection, and she naturally gazed over at the first possible moment. Both of them felt their hearts skip a beat. The first feeling that Hu Yuhao's spiritual detection gave them was an aura that seemed to blanket the entire world. It didn't come from a single soul beast, it was from a group, and one that was charged with power. Pair after pair of dark red eyes glowed faintly in the darkness of the night, and their muscular bodies didn't make a sound at all as they traversed the forest. They were like specters of the night as they gradually moved closer. Hu Yuhao instantly warned everyone who was still cultivating with his spiritual detection. He didn't make a sound at all, and he made a gesture to Wang Chua to keep quiet at the same time. He still didn't know whether these soul beasts were coming after them, or if they were just passing by. These soul beasts were about 800 meters away, and they were gradually pushing forward. Everyone woke up one after another. They didn't need Hu Yuhao to tell them verbally, they could see the soul beasts that were coming closer through Hu Yuhao's spiritual detection. At this moment, the students from the inner courtyard displayed their exemplary qualities. Nobody made a sound as they swiftly started to move, and they relied on their geographical advantage to find a spot where they could best defend themselves. Zhong Lashuan came next to Hu Yuhao swiftly, her pretty eyes sparkling. She didn't look a single bit like she did when she was meditating. She made an inquisitive gesture toward Hu Yuhao, and Hu Yuhao responded with a subtle shake of his head to signal that he didn't know what these soul beasts were after. Zhong Lashuan waved her hands for everyone to maintain their formation. There were quite a few soul beasts in this pack, at least a few hundred. Soul beasts that lived in the hybrid region had at least 1,000 years of cultivation, and several hundred of them would be extremely difficult to deal with. Furthermore, Hu Yuhao's spiritual detection told him that there were more than just 1,000-year soul beasts among the pack they were facing. It was better not to provoke this pack if they could help it. The soul beasts didn't seem like they had discovered the company, and were just gradually moving towards the human's position. Zhong Lashuan's eyebrows knit together. She was a little conflicted at this moment. She felt like these soul beasts weren't coming after them, but the marks they would leave behind if they left this location now would definitely be discovered. However, they would definitely meet up with these soul beasts if they didn't move away. Such an enormous pack would undoubtedly assault them if they saw them. Zhong Lashuan glanced at Hu Yuhao subconsciously, but right at this moment, Hu Yuhao suddenly used his spiritual power to signal in everyone's minds, "Prepare for battle." Just when he gave out the signal, the soul beasts that seemed like they had no target all suddenly picked up speed, and split into two groups as they flanked the Shrek band from both sides. The 7 or 8 soul beasts that were charging at the front were the leanest and most robust ones. They were simply too quick. The forest's complicated landscape didn't seem to impede them at all. They separated and flanked, and it was obvious that these soul beasts had premeditated their battle strategy. They had clearly discovered the company way earlier, and treated them like prey. Zhong Lashuan growled softly, "Prepare for battle, everyone. Maintain the original formation. These soul beasts are very hard to handle, so everyone is to go straight for the kill. Give your all in this fight. Mo Xian, unleash your halo." Yes. Mo Xian acknowledged as 2 yellow, 2 purple, and 2 black soul rings rose up from his feet. In the next moment, halo after halo rippled from his body, enveloping everyone. Hu Yuhao could clearly feel that his strength and speed had been amplified in tandem, and his spiritual focus became a little stronger. Mo Xian had unleashed his first 3 halos, but the strength of his amplification couldn't really be complemented, as its effects couldn't even reach a fifth of Ning Tian's 7 treasures glazed pagoda. The soul beasts arrived right when Mo Xian activated his halos. The 7 or 8 burliest soul beasts were in the vanguard. Everyone could clearly see that the soul beasts were a bunch of baboons when they came nearer. They were huge and tall, and could even be compared to a normal bear species. Their muscles were tight and bulging, and their lean and mean appearance instilled a sense of fear in people's hearts. Their faces were ghastly white, in strong contrast to their black fur. Their blood-red eyes in their white faces were daunting, and this appearance was especially petrifying in the darkness of the night. These are bloody baboons. Be careful, everyone. Bloody baboons have powerful physical strength, and bloodlust is their innate skill. Bloodlust allows them to immediately boost their offensive and defensive capabilities. Their heads are their vital point, so everyone should go for their heads. Zhong Lushuan didn't panic at all as they faced this siege from a pack of high-level soul beasts. She rapidly gave the necessary commands while she released her martial soul at the same time. Hua Yuhao was standing behind her, and he could see 2 yellow, 2 purple, 3 black, and 1 red soul ring rise from beneath her feet. The pack of bloody baboons paused momentarily when her red soul ring appeared, as if they were a little hesitant. Bloody baboons were soul beasts that were extremely hard to deal with. They moved in packs, even as their individual fighting strength was also relatively formidable. They were known as beings who had bronze skin and steel bones. They had strong defensive capabilities, and they had immense strength powerful enough to strangle a tiger to death with their bare hands. They were highly resistant to soul power of any element, and their black fur, which was as tough as metal, was their best defensive trait. What was even more frightening was their innate skill, bloodlust. Once it was used, their defensive and offensive capabilities would be boosted exponentially, while they would lose the ability to feel pain and would no longer fear death. Bloody baboons were naturally cruel and fierce, and they were also very intelligent. They were clearly trying not to be discovered when they were coming forward slowly. Fortunately, Hua Yuhao could tell through his spiritual detection that their blood essences were changing, and he was able to warn everyone to get ready in advance. The tallest bloody baboon at the very front had a conspicuous lock of golden fur on its forehead. It howled into the sky, more than 3 meters tall when it stood up straight as it hammered its chest heavily with its fists, which it sounded like deafening drums. A circle of golden light radiated from its body, and the bloody baboons around him were covered with a pale golden layer. Their auras became even more fearsome than before, and the fear that had flashed across their eyes before vanished into thin air. Murderous looks exploded from their eyes as they snarled and charged forward. Zhong Lushuan lowered her voice and said, "That's the Baboon King. He's a 50,000-year soul beast. Be careful, everyone, this is mass berserk." Something glowed behind Zhong Lushuan's back as she spoke. It was a crescent moon that seemed like it was hanging off a tree as everything lit up after its appearance. Zhong Lushuan's skin looked pale and translucent under the moonlight. She pointed forward with her right hand, and moonlight immediately erupted from the crescent moon above her. The baboons that came forward first were immediately smashed away wherever the moonlight fell. However, the bloody baboons' defensive capabilities were boosted under the effects of mass berserk, and they just rolled around on the ground before they got back to their feet, mostly unharmed. The group from Shrek Academy had been surrounded at this moment. Large throngs of baboons leapt out from their surroundings, but they didn't come any closer, forming a tight and compact circle around the humans. The company could tell from their movements that these baboons had between 2,000 to 3,000 years of cultivation. The Baboon King was undoubtedly the strongest one, and there were several other 10,000-year baboons beside him. There were also several other 10,000-year baboons in the packs that had flanked them to either side. The Baboon King continued hammering his chest. His mass berserk continued to spread, and quickly encompassed all the baboons around him. However, the baboons were not hasty with their attack, and only pushed forward gradually. The air immediately became extremely tense. The students from Shrek weren't panicky or flustered in the least, even though they were facing such a hazardous situation. The Baboon King had 50,000 years of cultivation, which meant that he was almost equivalent to an 8-ringed Soul Doluor. The humans had 2 Soul Doluor on their side, and they even had Dean Cai, who was a titled Doluor, to hold the fort. These bloody baboons were difficult to deal with, but it wouldn't be easy for them to threaten their company. Han Ruoruo had shifted behind Zhong Lushuan at this moment. Her dazzling golden rope shimmered into view. However, she didn't attack her enemies, but wrapped the rope once around her companions' waists. A powerful control-type soul master didn't just control his or her enemies, but also had to take care of his or her own people. The Baboon King stared at Zhong Lushuan with those ferocious eyes of his, while Zhong Lushuan returned his gaze with a calm expression. All of a sudden, the Baboon King roared as he applied strength to his thick and strong lower limbs. His incredibly muscular body immediately barreled towards Zhong Lushuan, while a layer of golden light glimmered on his body. His tremendous forward-moving figure actually appeared faintly surreal and illusory. Zhong Lushuan's first and third soul rings lit up at the same time. A streak of moonlight first descended on her body, and she was completely encircled by the radiance, before another beam of moonlight shone on the Baboon King's body immediately afterwards. There was a loud boom, and the Baboon King's momentum paused, but he still continued his charge at Zhong Lushuan. The other baboons charged forward when the Baboon King made his move, and the 10,000-year bloody baboons immediately launched their hysterical assault. Zhong Lushuan placed her hands in front of her chest. The crescent moon behind her burst with light as streak after streak of moonlight blasted down from the sky. She blocked the Baboon King's forward momentum and 4 other 10,000-year baboons at the same time. Of course, she wasn't the only target, and enemies circled in from all sides. 2 of the 10,000-year baboons charged toward Hua Yuhao and the others. At this moment, Wang Donga was on Hua Yuhao's right, while Wang Chua was on his left, both of them having removed their veils for the night's rest. The 2 baboons leapt into the sky at the same time, and one of them went straight for Hua Yuhao. It placed its elongated hands above its head and clenched them into fists before slamming them straight down. Hua Yuhao was young, but he was an experienced fighter. Cold light flickered in his eyes as 4 soul rings rose from beneath him. His eyes instantly turned white as a white light circle spread in all directions. Mass enfeeblement. Hua Yuhao's mass enfeeblement was also like a halo, but it was far stronger than Mo Xian's halos. Almost all the bloody baboons slowed down in that instant, and the ferocity of their forward momentum was greatly reduced. The bloody baboons were adept with physical attacks, while mass enfeeblement targeted physical bodies, so it could be considered a counter. Mass berserk had just taken effect on these baboons, but its effects were immediately countered and offset by mass enfeeblement. Hua Yuhao was taking care of the whole battlefield, but he chose to advance instead of retreat as he slipped forward in a flash. His body slid just underneath the 10,000-year baboon's armpits as he slapped his right hand toward the other one. The bloody baboon's tactic of choice was to meet force with force. The baboon didn't even bother evading Hua Yuhao's attack as it swung its arms out and swept them towards Hua Yuhao. However, was Hua Yuhao's right hand that easy to fight against? When his right hand pressed against the baboon, the controlling crane-capturing dragon was immediately used. He didn't pull, but pushed instead, and he borrowed the baboon's own strength to bounce backwards rapidly. 5 streams of blood spurted out as that 10,000-year bloody baboon howled ferociously. A dark golden blade glimmered in Hua Yuhao's right hand. The foot-long blade had been buried entirely in the baboon's body. Its fur was tough, but it was still a far cry from Hua Yuhao's dark golden terror claw. Still, this baboon was truly fearsome. Its ribs were heinously injured, but it hadn't lost its ability to fight. It began to roar hysterically on the spot while a dense blood essence erupted from its body. It was about to enter bloodlust mode. Hua Yuhao had singled out one of the 2 10,000-year bloody baboons, so the other one naturally went for Wang Donga and Wang Chua. Wang Donga was focused on Hua Yuhao, and she immediately followed up after Hua Yuhao launched his attack. The radiant butterfly goddess wings stretched out behind her back as the voluminous light of the butterfly goddess burst forward. The light of the butterfly goddess wasn't weak, but it was definitely not strong enough to break through the bloody baboon's defenses. All it could do was hinder the baboon's forward movement. Wang Chua made her move at this moment. A crisp dragon roar could be heard as Wang Chua's body flared up with riveting and brilliant golden light. She arrived before the baboon in an instant. The baboon swung its fist at her without hesitation. A stunning scene occurred. Wang Chua was such a pretty little lady, but she didn't use any soul skills at this moment, choosing to meet force with force instead. Her small white fist clashed with the baboon's dustpan-sized fist in the air, just like that. Wang Chua's fist turned golden in an instant. Her eyes were incredibly determined and unwavering, and the bloody baboon actually halted in its tracks after colliding with her simple punch. Golden light burst out as a shrill cracking sound could be heard. That bloody baboon's arm arched backward in the instant after the collision, but only half of its arm moved. It had such a thick and tough arm, and yet it broke, just like that. The 10,000-year bloody baboon's forte was meeting force with force, and yet it actually lost the fight, and absolutely so. Wang Chua seemed to have expected this, and she didn't pause after launching her fist. She tapped on the ground with the tip of her foot, and her entire body was propelled forward with a boom, as if she were a golden cannon shell. The bloody baboon wanted to use bloodlust as it howled in agony, while extending the fingers of its other hand to make a grab at Wang Chua. Wang Chua's body was still in midair, but she didn't dodge or evade the attack, making the exact same grabbing action. Behind her, Wang Donga didn't even see how she did it. All she saw was Wang Chua grabbing one of the baboon's fingers. In the next moment, her forward-moving body suddenly plummeted toward the ground, and she touched down like a 500-kilogram sluice. Boom! An even more violent impact could be heard this time, and an intense shockwave erupted from where Wang Chua landed on the ground. She flipped over several other bloody baboons that were charging behind her. Afterwards, she was still grabbing onto that bloody baboon's finger as she hurled its 2-meter-tall, muscular, and lean body into the air. Yes, she hurled it into the air. Boom! The 10,000-year bloody baboon was slammed forcefully into the ground, the force of the impact knocking over 2 other baboons. Wang Chua released that finger, which was broken until it couldn't be broken any further, and she raised her right fist as 2 yellow, 2 purple, and 1 black soul rings rose from her body. Her first purple soul ring sparkled, and she punched out as a dragon head seemed to flash by in midair and integrate itself into this fist, and this fist rained down onto the bloody baboon's tough skull. Boom! The bloody baboon's head was driven directly into the ground. Its enormous body was still exuding blood energy as it suddenly stopped, and its legs curved upward before they crashed down heavily once more. The baboon was no longer moving. This, Wang Donga held herself in high regard, but even so, she couldn't help but draw in a cold breath as she watched. So violent. Wang Chua is just so violent. From beginning to end, Wang Chua had relied entirely upon her fearsome and ferocious strength to fight, but this seemingly simple brutality and fighting style actually killed a 10,000-year bloody baboon in such a short period of time. Hua Yuhao's fight was also ending on the other side. The bloody baboon had just unleashed bloodlust, but it couldn't really use it before it landed heavily onto its own kin. Hua Yuhao used spiritual confusion, and it hit the baboon right at the time when it had raised its bloodlust to the highest possible level. The 10,000-year bloody baboon was experiencing pain, hysteria, weakness, and bloodlust at the same time, and it finally went insane. It began to wave its fists around with all its strength like a windmill, and the first two targets were its partners beside it as it knocked them into the sky. It began to whirl its arms around even more crazily in the next moment. Hua Yuhao was a member of Shrek Academy, and he naturally had some knowledge about soul beasts in their bloodlust state. Soul beasts that were under the effects of bloodlust had their strength greatly amplified, but their intelligence would also be lowered to the minimum. That was the price of bloodlust. It was easy to imagine how soul beasts would react to spiritual confusion when they could no longer maintain their rationality and intelligence. It was easy to see that Hua Yuhao's mass enfeeblement and spiritual confusion were exceptionally effective against bloody baboons. Hua Yuhao didn't pursue his target as faint lights flickered. He was a control-type soul master, so his main role was to assert control over the entire battlefield and protect his companions at the same time, thus eventually achieving victory. He turned around after unleashing spiritual confusion, and he caught the scene where Wang Chua hurled the other bloody baboon into the sky and slammed it into the ground. Hua Yuhao's mouth opened so wide a duck egg could probably fit inside. Isn't this the girl that snatched the baked bread from me? This strength is a little too terrifying. Hua Yuhao's strength was relatively formidable, but he knew that he could not reach that level of brutality and explosiveness. But she had managed to do it. The golden dragon truly lived up to its name as the ancestor of strength. Furthermore, her strength seemed to be even higher than his previous speculations. Faced with this fearsome draconic prestige, the savage bloody baboons seemed a little afraid to come forward. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.